Attorney Sarah Martinez had been defending Marcus Cole for armed robbery for 6 months, building what she thought was an airtight alibi case. But when she walked into the courthouse bathroom and overheard two men discussing how perfectly the Cole setup worked, Sarah's former prosecutor instincts kicked in. The man she'd been fighting to prove innocent wasn't just guilty. He was part of a criminal conspiracy that had been using her own legal expertise to cover their tracks. What happened next would force Sarah to choose between her career as a defense attorney and her duty to justice, a choice that would expose the most sophisticated legal manipulation she'd ever encountered. Sarah Martinez hadn't always been a defense attorney. For 12 years, she'd been one of the most successful prosecutors in the district attorney's office, with a conviction rate that made her both feared by criminals and respected by colleagues. Her specialty was complex conspiracy cases, the ability to unravel sophisticated criminal networks, understand how multiple defendants work together, and piece together evidence that revealed criminal organizations. She'd put away mob bosses, white-collar criminals, and organized crime syndicates that thought they were too smart to get caught. Sarah's approach was methodical and ruthless. She studied criminal psychology, learned to think like her opponents, and developed strategies that turned conspirators against each other. She could spot lies, recognize patterns, and build cases that seemed impossible to defend against. Her most significant case had been the prosecution of the Castellano crime family, a sophisticated organized crime network that had controlled illegal gambling, loan sharking, and money laundering operations across 3 states. The case had taken 2 years to build, involving dozens of defendants and thousands of pieces of evidence. Sarah had successfully convicted 17 members of the organization, including the family's boss, Antonio Castellano, who received multiple life sentences. The case had been considered a landmark victory against organized crime and had established Sarah as one of the premier prosecutors in the state. But then came the Martinez revelation. 6 months after the Castellano convictions, new evidence emerged that completely undermined Sarah's case. A key witness had lied under oath, crucial evidence had been fabricated, and several defendants who had been convicted were actually innocent of the charges against them. The scandal wasn't Sarah's fault. She'd been given false information by corrupted law enforcement officers who had their own agenda. But the result was devastating. Innocent people had gone to prison based on her prosecution. Her reputation was destroyed, and her faith in the justice system was shattered. Sometimes, being a great prosecutor means being too good at building cases, her supervisor had explained during her resignation. You trusted evidence that seemed unshakable, and that trust was betrayed by people who should have been protecting justice. Sarah left the prosecutor's office and became a defense attorney, determined to use her knowledge of criminal prosecution to protect defendants from the kind of prosecutorial overreach that had destroyed her career. For 5 years, she'd been fighting on the other side of the courtroom, using her understanding of prosecutorial strategy to defend clients against criminal charges. She told herself she was protecting the innocent, ensuring due process, and making sure that what had happened to her clients during the Castellano case never happened to anyone else. But now, standing in a courthouse bathroom, listening to two men discuss how they'd manipulated her into providing the perfect defense for a guilty client, Sarah realized that her expertise was being used against justice once again. Marcus Cole had seemed like the perfect client for a defense attorney seeking redemption. He was accused of armed robbery at a convenience store, but his case was filled with prosecutorial problems, unreliable witnesses, questionable evidence collection, and what appeared to be police misconduct during the investigation. When Marcus first walked into Sarah's office 6 months ago, he'd been soft-spoken, clearly frightened, and adamant about his innocence. He claimed to have been visiting his sick grandmother in Albany at the time of the robbery, and he had documentation to support his alibi: hospital records, pharmacy receipts, and witness statements from family members. The case against Marcus seemed weak from the beginning. The convenience store security camera had malfunctioned during the robbery, leaving no clear images of the perpetrator. The store clerk's identification was uncertain. She'd admitted under questioning that she'd been distracted and hadn't gotten a good look at the robber's face. Most damning for the prosecution, Marcus's alibi appeared to be solid. He'd been at Albany Medical Center with his grandmother, who was receiving treatment for pneumonia. The hospital records showed his presence, and multiple family members confirmed his story. Sarah had taken the case because it seemed like exactly the kind of prosecutorial overreach she'd dedicated her new career to fighting against. An innocent man being railroaded by a justice system that was more interested in closing cases than finding the truth. Over 6 months, Sarah had built what she considered to be an unbeatable defense. She'd documented every flaw in the prosecution's case, gathered additional evidence supporting Marcus's alibi, and prepared testimony that would demonstrate reasonable doubt beyond any question. But now, having overheard 2 men discussing the Cole setup, Sarah was beginning to realize that she'd been the one who was being set up all along. The conversation Sarah had overheard was brief, but revealing. The Cole setup worked perfectly. The prosecutor took the bait, and now his defense attorney is doing exactly what we need her to do. What about after the trial? After he's acquitted, Cole disappears, and we move on to the next operation. Martinez will never know she helped a career criminal walk free. Sarah's prosecutorial instincts, dormant for 5 years, immediately kicked into high gear. She began analyzing her own case with the methodical approach that had once made her such an effective prosecutor. The first red flag was the convenience store security camera. Sarah had accepted the prosecution's explanation that it had malfunctioned. But now she wondered, what were the odds that a sophisticated criminal operation would attempt a robbery at one of the few moments when surveillance was non-functional? The second issue was Marcus's alibi. It was almost too perfect. Detailed documentation, multiple witnesses, and a compelling narrative about a devoted grandson caring for his sick grandmother. Sarah had seen criminals create false alibis before, but this one was so thoroughly constructed that it had impressed even her prosecutorial skepticism. The third problem was Marcus himself. For someone facing serious criminal charges, he'd been remarkably calm throughout the proceedings. Most innocent defendants were either terrified or angry about being falsely accused. Marcus seemed almost expectant, as if he knew how the case would turn out. Sarah began conducting her own investigation, using contacts from her prosecutorial days to dig deeper into Marcus Cole's background. What she found disturbed her. Marcus Cole had no significant criminal record, but he had connections to several people who did. His sick grandmother was actually the mother of a known organized crime figure. The hospital where his alibi was established had been used before to provide cover stories for criminal defendants. Most troubling, Sarah discovered that Marcus had specifically requested her as his defense attorney, something that was unusual for someone who claimed to be a small-time defendant with limited knowledge of the legal system. As Sarah dug deeper, she began to recognize a pattern that chilled her to the bone. This wasn't just about one case. This was about a sophisticated operation that was using her reputation and expertise to provide perfect defenses for guilty criminals. Sarah pulled files on her cases from the past 5 years and analyzed them with fresh eyes. What she found was disturbing. 12 of her clients had been accused of crimes that occurred when surveillance systems were coincidentally non-functional. 15 of her clients had alibis that were almost impossibly detailed and well documented. 7 of her clients had specifically requested her as their attorney. Despite having no apparent knowledge of her background, 4 of her clients had disappeared shortly after being acquitted, never to be heard from again. Sarah realized she was looking at evidence of a criminal conspiracy that had been operating for years, using her own legal skills to provide cover for sophisticated criminal operations. The pattern suggested that someone was orchestrating crimes in ways that would create reasonable doubt, then steering the defendants to Sarah's defense practice, knowing that her prosecutorial background and determination to protect the innocent would make her an incredibly effective advocate for their carefully constructed defenses. But who was behind it, and how had they been manipulating the justice system so effectively? Sarah decided to confront Marcus directly during their next meeting, but she needed to be careful. If her suspicions were correct, Marcus wasn't just a criminal defendant. He was part of an organization sophisticated enough to manipulate the legal system for years without detection. "Marcus," Sarah said during their pre-trial conference, "I've been reviewing some details about your case, and I have some questions." "Of course," Marcus replied, with the same soft-spoken demeanor he'd maintained for 6 months. "What can I clarify?" "I've been wondering how you knew to ask for me specifically as your attorney. Most defendants don't have detailed knowledge of different lawyers' backgrounds and specialties." For just a moment, Marcus's carefully maintained facade flickered. Sarah caught a glimpse of calculation behind his eyes, the look of someone quickly deciding how much truth to reveal. "I did some research after I was arrested," Marcus said carefully. "I wanted the best possible representation, and your reputation for protecting innocent clients is well known." "My reputation for prosecuting organized crime is also well known," Sarah replied, watching Marcus's reaction closely. "Some might think that hiring a former prosecutor would be risky for someone involved in criminal activity." "I'm not involved in criminal activity," Marcus said, but his tone had changed slightly. There was an edge to his voice that hadn't been there before. Sarah realized she was looking at a completely different person than the frightened, innocent man she'd been defending for 6 months. The mask was slipping, and Marcus Cole was revealing himself to be something far more dangerous. "Marcus," Sarah said quietly, "who are you really? And what organization sent you to me?" Marcus leaned back in his chair, and for the first time since Sarah had known him, he smiled, a cold, calculating expression that transformed his entire appearance. "Sarah Martinez," he said, his voice now carrying a confidence that had been completely absent before. "The prosecutor who put away the Castellano family, the defense attorney who's been providing perfect legal cover for operations you could never imagine." "You've been using me," Sarah realized. "We've been employing your services," Marcus corrected, "and very effectively, I might add." What Marcus revealed next was the most sophisticated criminal conspiracy Sarah had ever encountered, and she'd been an unwitting participant for 5 years. "The Castellano prosecution was impressive," Marcus explained, no longer bothering to maintain his innocent defendant act. "You demonstrated exactly the kind of prosecutorial expertise that organized crime needed to understand and counter." "So you've been studying my methods?" "We've been employing them. Every successful prosecution technique you developed has been reverse-engineered to create unbeatable defenses. Every psychological insight you used to understand criminals has been used to understand prosecutors." Marcus explained that Sarah's transition from prosecutor to defense attorney had been the perfect opportunity for a new type of criminal operation, one that used legal expertise to provide cover for sophisticated crimes rather than simply trying to avoid law enforcement. "The beauty of the system," Marcus continued, "is that you're not just providing legal defense, you're providing moral legitimacy. When Sarah Martinez, the prosecutor who took down the Castellano family, defends a client, everyone assumes that client must be innocent. And you've been exploiting that assumption. We've been leveraging your reputation and expertise to create reasonable doubt in cases where doubt shouldn't exist. Your prosecutorial background makes you incredibly effective at spotting weaknesses in criminal cases, weaknesses that we engineer into our operations from the beginning." Sarah realized she was looking at the evolution of organized crime, criminals who had learned to use the justice system itself as a tool for avoiding consequences, and who had been using her own expertise to perfect their methods. "How many crimes?" Sarah asked. "How many clients have you successfully defended in the past 5 years?" Marcus replied. "Because approximately 60% of them were guilty of exactly the charges they were facing." Sarah found herself facing an impossible ethical dilemma. As Marcus's attorney, she had a legal obligation to provide him with zealous representation, even knowing that he was guilty and part of a criminal conspiracy. But as a former prosecutor who had dedicated her career to justice, she also had a moral obligation to prevent criminals from escaping consequences for their actions. "What happens now?" Sarah asked. "Now you continue to do what you've been doing so effectively," Marcus replied. "You present my defense, you secure my acquittal, and you move on to the next client we send you. The system continues to work exactly as it has been working. And if I refuse? Marcus's expression hardened. Ms. Martinez, you've been providing legal services to a sophisticated criminal organization for 5 years. Your fingerprints are on dozens of cases that allowed serious criminals to walk free. If you suddenly develop ethical concerns, you might find yourself facing questions about your own involvement in obstruction of justice. Sarah realized that the conspiracy was even more sophisticated than she'd thought. They hadn't just been using her legal expertise. They'd been positioning her to be a potential scapegoat if their operations were ever discovered. You've been setting me up from the beginning, Sarah said. We've been protecting our investment, Marcus corrected. Your continued cooperation ensures that everyone benefits from this arrangement. Sarah looked at this man she'd spent 6 months defending, understanding finally that she'd been played by criminals who understood not just how to commit crimes, but how to manipulate the very system designed to stop them. But Sarah also realized something that Marcus didn't know. As a former prosecutor, she understood how criminal conspiracies worked, and she knew exactly how to bring them down. That night, Sarah began the most important investigation of her career, not as a prosecutor building a case, but as a defense attorney who had discovered that her own practice had been corrupted by criminals. Using skills she'd developed during her prosecutorial career, Sarah began documenting the criminal conspiracy that had been operating through her law practice. She analyzed patterns in her cases, identified connections between clients, and traced financial relationships that revealed the organization's structure. What she discovered was a sophisticated network that had infiltrated multiple aspects of the justice system. The organization didn't just manipulate individual cases. They influenced witness testimony, corrupted evidence collection, and even affected judicial assignments to ensure that their operations would be successful. Sarah realized she was looking at a criminal conspiracy that made the Castellano family look like amateurs. This organization had learned to commit crimes and use the legal system to legitimize their activities, turning defense attorneys, prosecutors, and even judges into unwitting accomplices. But Sarah also realized that her unique position gave her an opportunity that no prosecutor had ever had. She was inside the organization with access to information that could bring down the entire network. The question was whether she could gather enough evidence to expose the conspiracy without alerting them to her investigation, and whether she could do it before Marcus Cole's trial ended and the opportunity was lost forever. Over the next 2 weeks, while continuing to prepare Marcus's defense, Sarah secretly documented every aspect of the criminal conspiracy she'd uncovered. She recorded conversations with Marcus where he revealed details about the organization's operations. She traced financial connections between her innocent clients and known criminal enterprises. She identified patterns in case assignments that revealed how the organization manipulated the judicial system. Most importantly, Sarah began working with her former colleagues in the prosecutor's office, providing them with evidence of the conspiracy while maintaining her cover as Marcus's defense attorney. The investigation revealed that the organization had been operating for over a decade, using corrupted defense attorneys to provide legal cover for hundreds of criminal operations. Sarah's practice was just one node in a network that included lawyers, investigators, and even some judges who had been compromised or manipulated. But the organization's greatest innovation was their use of Sarah's reputation and expertise. By having the prosecutor who had taken down the Castellano family defend their members, they provided their criminal operations with a legitimacy that made their defenses nearly unbeatable. Marcus Cole's trial began on a Monday morning, with Sarah facing the most complex ethical challenge of her career. She was legally obligated to provide Marcus with competent representation, but she was also secretly cooperating with law enforcement to expose the criminal conspiracy he represented. Sarah's strategy was audacious. She would present Marcus's defense exactly as she'd planned, demonstrating reasonable doubt and securing his acquittal. But she would also ensure that the trial exposed enough information about the organization's methods to allow law enforcement to dismantle their operations. During opening statements, Sarah laid out Marcus's alibi with her usual precision, presenting evidence that created reasonable doubt about his involvement in the convenience store robbery. But she also made sure to introduce testimony and evidence that revealed the sophisticated planning that had gone into creating that alibi. Information that prosecutors would need to understand how the organization operated. The trial proceeded exactly as Marcus had expected. Sarah's defense was methodical and effective, highlighting every weakness in the prosecution's case and presenting compelling evidence of Marcus's innocence. What Marcus didn't realize was that Sarah was also providing prosecutors with a roadmap for understanding how criminal organizations could manipulate the justice system and how future cases could be structured to prevent similar manipulation. After 3 days of testimony, the jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before returning a verdict of not guilty on all charges. Marcus Cole was acquitted, exactly as the organization had planned. But as Marcus left the courthouse, a free man, he was immediately arrested by federal agents on charges related to racketeering, conspiracy, and organized crime activities, charges that had been developed based on evidence Sarah had provided during her secret investigation. The arrests extended far beyond Marcus. Over the next 48 hours, federal agents dismantled the entire criminal network, arresting dozens of defendants, corrupt officials, and compromised attorneys who had been part of the conspiracy. Sarah's cooperation with law enforcement had provided prosecutors with enough evidence to bring down the most sophisticated criminal organization they'd ever encountered, one that had been using the justice system itself as a tool for criminal enterprise. The investigation revealed that Sarah had been manipulated into providing defenses for criminals in over 30 cases, allowing serious offenders to escape justice while building the organization's reputation for invincibility. But it also revealed that Sarah's decision to investigate and expose the conspiracy had prevented dozens of future crimes and had provided law enforcement with strategies for detecting similar operations in the future. 6 months after the conspiracy was exposed, Sarah Martinez received an unexpected visit from FBI Special Agent Jennifer Kim, who had led the investigation into the criminal network. "Ms. Martinez," Agent Kim said, "I wanted to thank you personally for your cooperation in this case. Your investigation and evidence were instrumental in taking down an organization that had been operating for over a decade." "I was just doing what I should have done from the beginning," Sarah replied. "I should have recognized what was happening sooner." "Actually," Agent Kim said, "your position as a defense attorney gave you access to information that no law enforcement investigation could have obtained. Your understanding of both prosecutorial strategy and defense tactics made you the perfect person to expose how they were manipulating the system." Agent Kim paused, then continued, "The Justice Department would like to offer you a position as a consultant on legal corruption cases. Your experience with both prosecution and defense, combined with your understanding of how criminal organizations operate, makes you incredibly valuable for preventing this kind of manipulation." Sarah considered the offer, thinking about the career changes that had brought her to this moment. "Agent Kim, I appreciate the recognition and the offer, but I think I want to continue being a defense attorney." "Even after discovering how your practice was corrupted?" "Especially after discovering how it was corrupted. The justice system works when defense attorneys, prosecutors, and judges all do their jobs with integrity. I want to be part of rebuilding that integrity." Sarah Martinez reopened her law practice with new protocols designed to prevent the kind of manipulation she'd experienced. She implemented background checks on potential clients, verified all evidence independently, and worked closely with ethical prosecutors to ensure that justice was served regardless of which side of the courtroom she was on. Her experience with the criminal conspiracy had taught her something important. The justice system's strength comes not from the adversarial relationship between prosecution and defense, but from the shared commitment to truth and fairness that should guide both sides. Sarah continued to defend clients accused of crimes, but now she did so with a deeper understanding of how criminal organizations operate and how the legal system could be manipulated. Her prosecutorial background and defense experience made her uniquely qualified to provide ethical representation while ensuring that guilty defendants didn't escape justice through legal manipulation. 3 years after exposing the conspiracy, Sarah had built a practice based on a simple principle: zealous advocacy for clients combined with unwavering commitment to justice and truth. 5 years after the Marcus Cole trial, Sarah Martinez was training new attorneys in legal ethics at the State Bar Association. Her experience with criminal manipulation of the justice system had made her a sought-after expert on maintaining integrity in legal practice. The most important lesson, Sarah told her students, is that being a great attorney, whether prosecutor or defense lawyer, means being committed to justice, not just to winning cases. But how do you balance zealous advocacy with ethical obligations, one student asked. You remember that the justice system only works when everyone involved is committed to finding the truth. A defense attorney's job isn't to help guilty clients escape consequences. It's to ensure that the prosecution meets its burden of proof and that innocent defendants are protected from wrongful conviction. Sarah's practice had become a model for ethical defense work, demonstrating that effective advocacy and commitment to justice weren't contradictory goals. The criminal organization that had manipulated her practice was serving lengthy federal sentences, their sophisticated methods exposed, and their ability to corrupt the justice system permanently destroyed. And Sarah Martinez had learned that sometimes the most important victories aren't about winning individual cases. They're about protecting the integrity of the system that makes justice possible. Sarah Martinez had discovered that she'd been played by criminals who understood how to manipulate both sides of the justice system, but in the end, she'd played them back, using her unique position to expose their operations and protect the very system they'd tried to corrupt. The courtroom doors opened for another day. New clients arrived with new cases, and Sarah Martinez prepared for another day of practicing law with the hard-won knowledge that justice requires constant vigilance against those who would use the system for their own criminal ends. If this story moved you, remember that the justice system depends on the integrity of everyone involved: attorneys, judges, prosecutors, and law enforcement officers. When that integrity is compromised, innocent people suffer and criminals escape consequences. Have you ever discovered that you were being manipulated or used by someone you trusted? How did you handle the situation? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Where are you watching from today? Drop a comment and remember, the legal professionals working to protect your rights and ensure justice might be fighting battles more complex than you ever imagined.